Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of my discussion with Christy Harrison on weight loss, weight stigma, diet culture, and type 2 diabetes. Again, all the links for Christy's intuitive eating classes, book, and social media handles can be found in the podcast description. Without further ado, let's get started.
Welcome to Type 2 and You with Meg, a diabetes podcast with the tools and guidance you need for your best life with type 2 diabetes. Your host, Megan Munoz, is a Dartmouth-trained health coach and master-prepared certified diabetes educator. She's helped thousands of people turn their diabetes fears, questions, and concerns into hope, confidence, and action. Ready to support your type 2 journey? Here's Meg.
Today's discussion starts out with a question I asked Christy about what people do when they really want something tangible to help them guide their eating habits with type 2 diabetes. The majority of people that I see are coming in, they really want something tangible. Maybe I'm putting words in their mouth, but the impression that I get, I should say, is that food is something they have control over. And that's the first thing people want to tackle. I want to do this because I have control over this. When somebody comes into you with that kind of mentality, how do you approach that? Because they're kind of, like you said, swinging back and forth on that pendulum. And in that case, they may be really fixated on that. I really want to do this, very restrictive type of pattern with my food, or I want to really focus on my health in this very restrictive way. How do you help someone who really wants something tangible to walk away with?
Yeah, it's tricky. One of the things that I do is try to sort of elucidate for them and help them to see and talk through how that's worked for them in the past. How restrictive dieting has worked or not worked for them. Because, I think a lot of people think of it as, oh, if I could just get back to that restrictive diet, and I did that once and it seemed to help. And then everything went to pot, and they don't see it in sort of that bigger picture of that is part of the process. That's part of the cycle of dieting, is that it's going to seem like it's working for a little bit, but then everything is going to kind of fall apart. And that all of it is what diets do to us. And so helping people kind of think through their own personal history to think, okay, objectively, was there ever a time when serious, severe restriction worked long-term? Did it work for seem to work for a short period of time, but then have negative consequences on the flip side? What were the consequences on my mental health? What were the consequences on my relationships? What were the consequences on my other physical health outcomes? Like, those things I mentioned before, reproductive health and digestive health and sleep and, body temperature and all of these different things that can be affected by diets and weight loss. So I think, helping people elucidate what restrictive diets have done to them in the past is one helpful piece, because, 9 times out of 10, people are like, oh, yeah, it didn't actually work, right? And I can see that probably this one wouldn't work either. This is kind of just another one of the same types of diets that I've already tried. Of course, it's hard for people to get to that place and truly stick with it because there's so much messaging to the contrary in diet culture. But I think that's one step. Another step is just kind of explaining to them this research on the failure rate of diets that I spoke about, and explaining that concept of the restriction pendulum and the swinging back and forth that they're inevitably going to do when they let go of something restrictive, or when they, if they were to embark on the restrictive diet that they are interested in trying, what do they think would happen long term? What kind of swing on the pendulum could they expect to have? And then, thinking through also kind of what they want from their life. What are their values? What is their long-term goal here? Because everyone I've talked to basically has said they don't want to just have their diabetes managed or their health managed for a short period of time. They want this to be sustainable, right? They want to make changes that are going to last. They want to make changes that are going to support their health in the long term. And they're willing to wait. Oftentimes when I ask people kind of straight out, like, do you want the short-term thing, the quick fix that is going to seem like it's working in the short term and then not actually sustain you? Or do you want to do something that's going to take a little longer and that's going to be harder and not feel as tangible right away, but that's going to ultimately get you to that goal of sustainable long-term health? Most people will pick the latter. Most people will say, yeah, even if it's harder in the moment, even if it takes a little longer, I want to try this other way because, people have tried diet culture's way endless times. I've had clients and talked to folks for my podcast who've been on, dozens of diets, like 65 diets,
Oh my
and
gosh.
yeah. And so when people sort of think about it in the long-term sense like that, it starts to make more sense that, yeah, it's not going to feel as tangible and quick right now, but, diets are this quick fix. Diet culture offers us those quick fixes, but maybe to have something really last and really be sustainable, we need to get away from the quick fix and we need to think about it, in a longer term way.
So you basically have them zoom out because I never really thought about how people idealize or kind of, or that was a success. I never really thought about people looking at the one time that they felt like it worked that way. But I suppose a lot of people would, and they think, oh, if I just did enough, I could get back to that again. Helping them see the big picture is really important, it sounds like.
Totally. Yeah. And I think, not everyone is ready for that. I think the people who come to me and, other people who are working in the intuitive eating and health at every size field might have more of an inkling that they're ready for that because that's who selects to work with me, is
Right.
someone who sees my marketing and resonates with that versus, someone who maybe selects to work with a more general diabetes dietitian or provider wouldn't necessarily be in that mindset yet. So it might take more discussion and more sort of ongoing work in order to help them get to that place where they're willing to see the bigger picture, where they're willing to kind of take the long view. And, it's really tricky because for me as a health at every size provider, I just am so familiar with the evidence that diets don't work and that they actively cause harm that I can't in good conscience prescribe one. And if someone wants to diet and sort of wants me to co-sign that, I can't do that. I've certainly had clients who were working with me who kind of went in and out of doing intuitive eating and health at every size and then slipped back into dieting and disordered eating. And we talked through that and, worked on it. So it's not like I kicked them out when they weren't, doing the intuitive eating and HAES thing. But, I supported them in trying to come back to their values and come back to something that was going to support them longer term. But I think for providers, it's important to sort of hold the line and make sure that we're not co-signing or fanning the flames of diet culture thinking, because it's very normal for people to slip in and out of diets as they're trying to get on this anti-diet path. But, I think to make sure that we're not colluding with that diet mentality in the process.
Yes. And I think I think about my work and it's very ingrained. I think when people come to see a diabetes educator, whether it's a dietitian or a nurse or another specialist, that they're expecting that. I think sometimes we get pigeonholed, and even dietitians, even if they're not diabetes educators, kind of get pigeonholed into this kind of box of, well, I'm going there because they're going to help me lose weight, or I know they're going to say this is what I need to do. And so even if we don't believe that, it does, like you said, just takes longer to kind of work out of that box that we're both kind of put in, the person with diabetes and the provider.
It's so interesting too, because diet culture really does put everyone in that box, right? It is so tricky when the provider is in that box from their training and, thinking that we're doing the right thing because that's what we've been told. And then, the client is also in that box from what they've been told about, especially diabetes, but really any sort of chronic condition, any health condition that they've had, probably been told about weight loss or food or changing, their exercise habits or what have you. So everybody is kind of coming in that box, and it's sort of this interesting collaborative kind of process of, dismantling that box and stepping outside of it together. And
Yes.
it's a challenge for sure.
I have a few other questions and then we'll move on to takeaway of the day. And that's the part of the podcast where I just have you give, 2 or 3 tips on what you want people to walk away with from our conversation. So before we get to that, one of the things I wanted to ask is, there's a lot of infighting in diabetes. There's people that get really fixated on their special way of eating, and they really shame and blame people that don't eat the way they eat. If somebody's moving towards this health at every size, intuitive eating, but my family member wants me to eat this special diet, or I'm, getting hounded by other people, what would be kind of your tips for them to combat that mentality?
Yeah, such a good question. And my heart goes out to everyone who's in this position, because I think it's so common to have people in your life trying to get involved in your relationship with food, trying to tell you how to eat, for pretty much everyone in diet culture. I think that's common, but especially for people with diabetes, because family members and other loved ones can get so invested and think they know the way. And, it's understandable. They want you to be healthy and they want you to stick around and be with them. And so it's coming from a place of love oftentimes, but it can get so contentious. And ultimately they can really sort of step on your own autonomy and violate your boundaries in this process. So I think the best approach or sort of the first approach that I would say is helpful for dealing with this is setting boundaries and sort of reminding your loved ones and the people in your life that you are an autonomous human being. You're allowed to make your own choices, and that, you're doing something, you're pursuing a path toward health that works for you, especially if you're someone who's struggled with disordered eating and where the traditional advice on diabetes, the traditional restrictive advice, has not been helpful to you and has worsened your relationship with food, maybe led to swings between restriction and binging, which is not ultimately good for diabetes management, right? We know binge eating is associated with worse blood sugar outcomes and insulin resistance. So we want to make sure to, help people be stable and not be swinging between restriction and binging. So, if you're someone who has struggled with that, especially, I think explaining that to your loved ones, explaining that you've had sort of a toxic relationship with food and that this, mindset of restriction or these particular restrictive diets you've tried have not been helpful to you long term. And what you're really looking for is something sustainable and that's going to support your health in the long term. So you're working on healing that relationship with food, and you'd really appreciate if they could keep their opinions about food to themselves, or stay out of, stop sort of recommending things to you, allow you to have that be between you and your dietitian, you and your diabetes educator, you and your doctor, and, keep the relationship with your loved one as a peer relationship or a loved one relationship, and not as, them being sort of your de facto or self-identified medical provider, because that's not their job, and you can say that in, a loving, kind way, or a way that is, a little more forceful and direct and tell it like it is. You can say that in a way that explains what's going on for you and sort of goes into depth if you feel that kind of trust and safety with the person. Or you can say it in a way that's much more, sort of just the facts and not going into a lot of depth if you don't feel that closeness with the person. You have a lot of options in terms of how you frame it, but I think just that awareness that your body is your own and that you get to make decisions about your body, and your family members certainly have your best, they love you and they want you to be well, but they ultimately do not get to make the decisions about your body. That's your job and your choice. And then finding healthcare providers who will support you in this path to making peace with food and healing your relationship with your body as well, is also really important, because I think sometimes, like you said, and like I have experienced too as a dietitian, a lot of providers are just going by the book and going by the guidelines they've been taught, which come out of diet culture, and so might not understand intuitive eating and health at every size, and might inadvertently exacerbate your relationship with food, and might, some dietitians and diabetes educators even have their own pet diets that, fad diets that they think are the best, right? Like this one's recommending keto, that one's recommending fasting, whatever. Just know that the science behind those is shaky at best. And I would say not science that anyone should be basing their health decisions on, that there's pretty much a general trend in diets, which is that there's some seemingly promising evidence for every diet if you look at it in a very short term and with small numbers of people as well. But when you do studies that look at the long-term effects and larger numbers of people and repeat the same studies over and over again, you see that the supposed benefits dwindle, and that in fact people can't sustain those supposed benefits long term, not through any fault of their own, but because that's how diets work and that's how bodies work. And so I think if there's people in your life, providers, for example, who are pushing particular diets, I think it's worth getting a second opinion. I think it's worth finding a non-diet dietitian or diabetes educator or doctor who is willing to work with you on health at every size approaches to diabetes. So, I'm sure that, Meg, you have some recommendations of people, and I have a list of my own as well on my website of providers that I recommend. I have a list in my book as well. Just kind of seeking out people who are not going to exacerbate difficulties you have in your relationship with food, but who are going to help you heal those issues so that you can get to a place of truly sustainable self-care.
Yes, and I'll put links to your list on your website, and then I'll also have links finding a certified intuitive eating and health at every size expert in the podcast description. So my last question then before we move on to takeaway of the day is a similar kind of train of thought. When I look at this kind of thought process and I look at how I kind of was oblivious to a diet culture mentality. I am a thinner person, so I have heavier family members, but I guess I never really realized I was a little bit maybe padded from it just because of my body size, and I didn't really realize the impact and all of these things on diet culture and things like that. I just have to ask, like, how does someone, when it's loved ones, medical providers, media, no matter where they look or where they go, it's everywhere. How does someone have the mental and emotional stamina to stand up against this tide that comes at them? What do you see in the people that are successful in being able to do intuitive eating and health at every size in a way that really enhances their life?
Yeah, such a great question. And I mean, I'll preface this by saying I'm a thinner person too, so I don't have the lived experience of weight stigma that so many of my friends and clients and colleagues have had. But what I've learned from them is, and from research as well, is that I think the best buffer against all of that stigma, and it does come from all corners. It comes from doctors and media and loved ones, and it can be incredibly oppressive and incredibly painful. But, the best buffer that I've seen from that is community, is having people who get it, having people you can vent to about it, and people who aren't going to weight stigmatize you, but instead are going to lift you up and support you and say you're good and valuable and I love you no matter what your body looks like. And even at this very large body size that you're at, I think you're incredible and beautiful and worthy and deserve all the respect. People who are going to really have your back and be there for you no matter what. And, it's sometimes hard to find that in loved ones in real life because, or I shouldn't say real life because online is real life too, but loved ones in a meat space, it's hard to find that sometimes with those loved ones because people have their own pre-existing diet culture ideas and sort of everyone has their journey out of diet culture. And a lot of loved ones of people with diabetes, I think, can sometimes feel self-righteous or, just so ensconced in this belief that they need to take care of you and save you that sometimes they can be totally unaware of your needs for, support in this way of pushing back against weight stigma. But I think for, there's certainly some folks have some people in their lives that are open to that and maybe would be open to hearing about how weight stigma has affected you, how it's harmed you, how it hurts you to hear people tell you to lose weight, including your loved ones, how it hurts you to hear that from doctors and the media and from all corners of the world all the time. And, maybe sharing some of the data and the science on weight stigma too, if it's helpful, but kind of couching it in your own story, I think can really help. And when you do that, you can sometimes, not everyone has people like this in their life that are sort of ready for that, but some folks are ready and can come over and be an ally with you standing against weight stigma once they understand what it is and the effect that it's had on you. But I think, another way of building community that I've seen be really successful for people is online. There's a huge community now on social media that is health at every size and intuitive eating, and people sharing, memes and images of themselves, of people in larger bodies having a great time, having a good life, going through human stuff, the everyday, the mundane, the boring, the beautiful, the fashionable, the relationships, all of it, right? Showing just kind of the rich tapestry of life in a larger body unapologetically without, making their great life contingent on weight loss. And I think that's incredibly powerful, seeing images and seeing examples and models of people who are doing it. There's a couple books I really love for this. Lindy West's book, Shrill, I think is amazing for helping, model a rich, full life of someone in a larger body. Her TV show, Shrill, as well, which is on Hulu, is great. Jess Baker has a book called Things No One Will Tell Fat Girls that's really awesome. Really tells it like it is. And, lots and lots of other books. My book also quotes a lot of people who are prominent fat activists who, reclaim the word fat and the identity fat and have really learned that they don't need to apologize for their size and that weight loss doesn't work, and have really fought and learned how to accept their bodies. So, I think there's lots of resources out there. And then, of course, social media. I've got lots of people on Instagram that I share, info from, and people that I follow and follow me who are in this movement too. So you can come check out my Instagram if you want to try to connect with that world as well. But, I think there are lots of places online to go for community and books to read and websites to explore and all the media that can help you feel more immersed in a community of like-minded folks and start to understand the intuitive eating and health at every size perspectives better, and just help you feel like you're not alone in pursuing this way of being.
Let's move on to takeaway of the day and find out what Christy wants you to walk away with from our conversation.
Takeaway of the day: turning your information into action.
What would be your final couple of things that you would want people to walk away from this conversation with? So people listening with diabetes, what would be your messages to them?
Yeah, I would say, first and foremost, to have compassion for yourself for everything you've gone through. I think it's so hard to be someone with diabetes in this culture, and type 2 is often stigmatized, and, larger bodies are often stigmatized, and there's just so much stigma that you've probably been through in your life. And so to honor that, to recognize that and have compassion for that, I think is so, so key. And then also to recognize that, diet culture is this system of beliefs that we all were indoctrinated into from a very young age, that we did not choose to be indoctrinated into. We did not give our consent, but here we are. And that, a lot of the people telling you need to lose weight or telling you need to cut out particular foods or eat in a restrictive way are caught up in diet culture, are caught up in this belief system that vilifies larger bodies and vilifies certain foods and, makes others out to be the be all end all of health. And there is another way of seeing things. Diet culture is just one system of beliefs. It's just one lens on the world. It's the dominant one right now, but it doesn't mean that there's not other ways of seeing things. And intuitive eating and health at every size offer what I think is a really powerful challenge to that dominant point of view that really helps you pursue health and well-being in any size body, no matter what chronic diseases or other conditions you're living with, in a way that is truly health promoting, that doesn't put you on a chronic weight cycling or stigmatize you for the size of your body, but that helps you actually engage in health promoting behaviors that are going to be sustainable in the long run.
Thank you, Christy, so much for joining me on the podcast today. I'm so excited for everybody to listen in to our conversation.
Thank you so much, Meg. This is so fun.
And again, your book is Anti-Diet, Reclaim Your Time, Money, Wellbeing, and Happiness Through Intuitive Eating. You can find it on christyharrison.com/book, correct?
That is right. Yep. christyharrison.com/book. It's all there.
Perfect. Thank you, Christy. That concludes my interview with Christy Harrison. Remember, all the links to reach out to Christy, follow her on social media, or to find her book will be on the podcast description. I'll also put links to the books that she mentioned in this discussion. Make sure you tune in next week because it's kicking off a whole series of interviews with experts on intuitive eating, exercise physiology, and mental health surrounding type 2 diabetes and New Year's resolutions. My first interview is a perfect segue from this conversation because it's with a certified intuitive eating dietitian, Holly Paulson, who specializes in diabetes and eating disorders. So tune in next week, and don't forget, the number one thing you can do to manage your diabetes is bet on you.
Keep current on new episodes by subscribing to Type 2 and You with Meg. Be sure to share a link of today's episode to someone you know living with type 2 diabetes. Want to learn more about today's topic or need answers to your diabetes dilemmas? Contact Megan by using the links in the podcast description or visiting her webpage, type2andyou.org. This podcast is for informational purposes only and not intended as medical advice.